Hey there, night owls and thrill seekers. Welcome to Midnight Surge, where the shadows whisper and the dark holds secrets you can't unhear. If you're into this kind of chill, hit that subscribe button down below. Join the crew who never sleep easy. And let's dive into the dark together. Ready? Here's tonight's story. I've always been the kind of person who blends in. Not shy exactly, just background noise. In high school, especially at a place like Red River High in a quiet part of Kansas City, being invisible felt more like protection than a curse. I wasn't popular, but I wasn't bullied either. Just a normal junior trying to get through the year without too many bruises, physical or emotional. Back then, my focus was art. I'd spend hours sketching in the back of the library or on the bleachers during gym class. People assumed I was shy, but I just didn't like small talk. My favorite teacher was Mrs. Langford, AP Art, a wild-haired woman who wore scarves like flags and let us work in silence, which I appreciated more than she probably knew. I never really talked about the other teachers, or the assistant staff. There was one in particular, though. Someone who made a quiet school year unravel in a way I never saw coming. His name was Mr. Hensley. He wasn't a teacher exactly, more like an academic monitor. The kind of adult who floats between roles, covering absences, monitoring after-school detention, helping in the front office. Nobody knew much about him, which, looking back, probably made it easier for him to blend in. He wasn't young, late 60s maybe. Always wore pressed khakis and tucked-in polos. Carried a little black notebook like it was part of his uniform. Most students called him Mr. H, and he smiled in that vaguely patronizing way older men sometimes do when they think they've got everyone figured out. The first time I really noticed him was in room 103, where they held the after-school study hall. I'd been staying late on Tuesdays and Thursdays, because my mom picked up a second job and couldn't get me until 5:30. I didn't mind. It gave me time to draw. He started off quiet, asked what I was working on, complimented my shading. Nothing weird. Nothing that made me feel uneasy at first. He told me his wife had passed 2 years earlier and that he used to teach high school history before retiring. Said he got bored and wanted to stay connected to the next generation. It seemed harmless. I was polite, smiled when he offered mints, said thank you when he brought in those soft, homemade lemon cookies. At some point, I became the only regular in study hall. Other students found excuses to leave early or stopped showing up altogether. Mr. H started sitting closer, across from me instead of at his desk. Said the school didn't want him on his phone, so he might as well keep me company. Again, it didn't seem threatening, just awkward. I figured he was lonely. Then things shifted, slowly, like water rising in a basement. You don't notice it at first, just a damp smell. Then your socks are wet and it's too late. He began asking about my home life, if my mom was still working evenings, if I had a boyfriend, if I ever got lonely staying after school by myself. Questions that should have felt out of place, but I brushed them off. I told myself he was just being friendly, a retired teacher filling the silence with small talk. The next week, he gave me a sketchbook, black cover, thick pages, wrapped in a neat blue ribbon. Said he found it at a yard sale and thought of me. It was nice. Too nice. But I thanked him, and he looked so proud of himself that I felt guilty for being suspicious. The following Tuesday, there was a note inside the sketchbook, a little folded piece of paper tucked between 2 pages I hadn't drawn on yet. In tidy cursive, he'd written, "Some people see the world in black and white, but you live in color. Don't ever let the dull ones smother that light." It wasn't a bad note. It was actually kind of poetic. But something about it felt heavy. like there was a second meaning I didn't understand yet. I didn't say anything to anyone. Not my mom, not Mrs. Langford. I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. But that Friday, he showed up at my bus stop. Said he just happened to be passing by, that he knew it wasn't my study hall day, but thought I might need a ride since it was raining. I lied and said my mom was already on the way. He looked disappointed, but didn't argue. Just smiled and said, "Next time, then." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing his notebook, his calm, slow smile, that blue ribbon wrapped around the sketchbook like a gift he'd thought long and hard about. I started locking my bedroom window, even though we lived on the second floor. My mom teased me about being dramatic, but I couldn't explain the feeling in my chest, like something was crouched in the corner of my life, waiting for me to stop paying attention. And then came the Monday that changed everything. That Monday started off like any other. The hallways were buzzing with post-weekend drama, lockers slamming, someone laughing too loud near the vending machines. I kept my head down, earbuds in, trying to fade into the background like usual. At lunch, Mrs. Langford pulled me aside, said Mr. Hensley had dropped something off for me. A folder left on her desk. "He said you forgot it during study hall," she explained, handing it over without a second thought. But I hadn't been in study hall that day. I hadn't even seen him. Inside the folder was a typed letter. 3 pages, single-spaced, no heading, no greeting. Just a stream of thoughts that felt like someone had cracked open a mind that shouldn't have been revealed. He wrote about how much he enjoyed our quiet time. How rare it was to find someone who truly listens. He said I reminded him of a girl he once knew when he was younger, someone who understood the weight of the world too soon. That line made my hands go cold. Then it got worse. He wrote that he felt something special between us, that even though he knew it was complicated, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He said he'd never met a student with a soul as old and beautiful as mine. He ended it with, "You've unlocked a part of me I thought had died with my wife. I hope you keep the key." Folded with the letter was a necklace, a cheap silver chain with a tiny heart-shaped pendant. The back of it was scratched up, but I could still make out the engraving. "You saw me. Sekyo." I couldn't breathe. It was like something had torn open beneath my skin, a buzzing in my ears, my chest tight with disbelief and disgust. And still, I told no one. I don't know why. Maybe part of me felt responsible, like I should have said something sooner. Maybe I thought no one would believe me, or worse, they'd say I was overreacting. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't done anything that would hold up in court, but he had been in my head for months, slowly rearranging the furniture, making himself at home. The next day, he approached me in the hallway between classes. No warning, just appeared beside me, like he'd stepped out of the shadows. He asked if I liked the necklace, asked if I'd read every word. I nodded, not because I meant it, but because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. He leaned in too close, his voice soft. "Our connection is rare. Don't let anyone take that from you." That was the moment the fear finally outweighed the guilt. That night, I told my mom everything. Every after-school visit, every comment, the letter, the necklace, the way he made me feel like I owed him something for simply being polite. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, her jaw clenched. Then she picked up her phone. The school launched an internal investigation. Quietly, of course. They didn't want to cause panic. But it wasn't long before other students started whispering. A freshman girl came forward, said he'd asked for her number, under the pretense of sending homework help. Another said he'd offered her rides home, so she wouldn't have to walk. By the end of the week, he was gone, just like that. No warning, no goodbye. Room 103 was empty for months after. They eventually turned it into a supply closet. They told us Mr. Hensley had violated professional boundaries and would no longer be working in the district. That was all they said. But I knew. I'd seen it firsthand, how real horror doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it wears a name tag and smiles too much and remembers your birthday. I never saw him again. Sometimes I wonder if he still keeps that notebook, if he's found another quiet student in another school, sketching their way through silence, unaware of the trap slowly closing in. Now that I'm 2 years out of high school and hundreds of miles from that town, I think I can finally talk about what happened. Not because it's any easier to explain, but because I've finally stopped trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. For the longest time, I thought maybe I'd made more of it than it was, that maybe I was just being dramatic, or sensitive, or imagining things like everyone suggested. But no, I remember it too clearly. I remember every look, every silence, every second of that feeling, like something was always just a step behind me. I went to South Pine High in Rosedale, a small, quiet town in northern Michigan. The kind of place where the coffee shop knows your mom's name, and people leave their front doors unlocked. Or at least they used to. I spent most of my senior year trying to keep my head down. I had a job at a dog grooming place after school and a younger sister who needed help with her homeworks, so I didn't really care about being popular. I mostly just wanted to graduate and get out. There was this small, half-forgotten classroom on the second floor of the old building, room 208. It was one of those overflow rooms, mostly used by Mr. Altman, the geometry teacher, who didn't care what you did as long as you didn't break anything or talk too loud. I started spending my lunch there around October, mostly to avoid the cafeteria. It was too loud, too chaotic, and I hated the way people looked at me when I sat alone. In 208, I could eat my sandwich, scroll through my phone, maybe finish some homework. That's where I first noticed Jeremy. He was always there before I walked in, sitting near the windows, sketching or just staring outside. He was quiet, didn't eat much, maybe a granola bar or something. I figured he just liked being left alone too, and for the first few weeks, we didn't speak. Then one day, I dropped my pen while grabbing my charger from my backpack, and it rolled under his desk. He picked it up and handed it to me with this half smile, the kind that barely pulls at the corner of your mouth, like a secret only you're in on. And that's when he said something like, "You come here every day but never say anything. I was starting to think you were a ghost." I laughed awkwardly, said something dumb like, "Well, I try to stay invisible," and I guess that opened the door. After that, we started talking. Mostly small stuff. Parents, teachers, the usual, "this town sucks" kind of talk. He told me his dad worked at the mill and was never home, that his mom had left when he was 13. He didn't like people much, said they were loud and fake. I didn't disagree. At first, I was just glad someone was talking to me. He seemed kind of odd, but not in a bad way. Just quiet. The kind of person you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for him. And I wasn't. Not really. I laughed again, more awkward this time, and thanked him. It was such a small thing, but it felt observant. Too observant. That was the first time I remember feeling off. Not scared, not yet. Just off. Like I'd been watched longer than I realized. I didn't see him the next day. Or the day after that. When he did come back, he barely said a word, just sat across from me and scribbled into his sketchbook like I wasn't there. I told myself not to take it personally, but then I noticed something. Whenever I looked up, even for a second, he was already watching me. Not just glancing, watching, unmoving, unblinking. And then he'd look down like nothing happened. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. But then it started happening in the halls. I'd be walking to class, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd see him, leaning against a locker, or half hidden behind a water fountain. Just watching. Never saying anything, never smiling. And if I looked directly at him, he'd look away like it didn't mean anything. I stopped going to room 208 for lunch after that, but it didn't stop him. After I stopped going to room 208, I started eating in the art wing's stairwell with Mari, a girl I knew from my after-school job. She was blunt and funny, the kind of person who'd call out weird behavior without thinking twice. When I told her, casually at first, about Jeremy and how he'd started acting strange, she didn't brush it off like I thought she might. She narrowed her eyes, listened carefully, and said, "If he ever comes near you again, you text me. I don't care if I'm in class. I'll be there." I didn't expect her to take it seriously. No one ever had. But it only got weirder. He started showing up in places he never used to be. The gym hallway during my PE period, standing in the doorway of the band room while I waited for my sister, even once at the gas station when I went to grab snacks after school. He didn't say anything, just stood nearby, pretending to be interested in something else. He'd glance over, that same empty stare, and then walk away. Mari told me she'd overheard him talking to Kyle, this guy I used to hang out with sophomore year. Jeremy was asking what time I left for work, if I still carpooled with my mom, if I still played that card game we used to joke about back in October. Kyle thought it was weird but brushed it off, said Jeremy was just a loner, but it wasn't just Kyle. I found out later that he'd been messaging a few people I used to be friends with, asking casual questions about me like it was nothing. What I liked to eat, what kind of music I listened to, if I was seeing anyone. One of the girls even showed me the messages. They started normal, but there was something off about them. Then one afternoon, I forgot my hoodie in room 208. I hadn't been back there in weeks, and part of me didn't want to go. But it was my favorite hoodie, the oversized gray one with the faded wolf on the back. I waited until lunch was nearly over so I could slip in without bumping into anyone. I found it hanging on the back of a chair. That should have been the end of it, but when I turned to leave, I noticed a stack of sketchbooks on the desk near where Jeremy used to sit. I don't know what possessed me to look. Curiosity, maybe. A need to prove something to myself. I opened the top one, and I froze, page after page. They were all me. Sketches from across the room, close-ups of my face, my hands holding my phone, the side of my head when I was tying my hair back, even one where I was yawning. And they weren't just rough doodles. They were detailed, focused, obsessed. Some of them had notes scribbled in the margins, things like laughs at bad puns, eats slower when she's tired, looks left before talking. Things no one should be writing down. I put the sketchbook down and left the room as fast as I could. That night, I didn't sleep. I told Mari, and she wanted to go straight to the school, but I begged her not to. I didn't want to escalate it. I didn't want to make him angry. But it escalated anyway. A week later, I got a message from a random number. It was a photo. Me, standing at my locker, back turned, hair tied up in the exact same way as one of the sketches. No words, no context. Then another photo. Me walking out of the dog grooming shop still in uniform. Then a screenshot of my Spotify profile. My real one. The one I didn't share with anyone. I blocked the number, deleted my account, and started driving the long way to work, wearing a hoodie everywhere. I never confronted him. I never even looked him in the eye again. By graduation, he was still lurking. Still somehow connected to people I barely spoke to. Still slipping into places he didn't belong. He never got in trouble. Never got caught. He was too quiet, too clean, too careful. And then he was gone. He didn't show up to graduation. I never saw him after that. No one knows if he moved, dropped out, or just faded into the background like he always had. But sometimes, when I'm out walking in a new town or scrolling through an unfamiliar social feed, I get this feeling, this static in the back of my head, like I'm being watched again, like he's still out there, one step behind, collecting more pieces of me. And the worst part, I'll never really know when or if it ends. It was the middle of the fall semester when Mr. Carson told us we were getting a new student. That alone wasn't unusual. Kids transferred in and out of Hillside Prep all the time. But this one was different. He arrived midweek, midday, escorted into our English class just as we were diving into the crucible. His name was Rowan Blake, and he looked like he didn't want to be there. Tall, pale, a little disheveled, not in a careless way, but like his clothes had been chosen without any desire to look like anyone else. There was something off about the way he moved, like he hadn't figured out how much space he took up. He kept his eyes on the floor as Mr. Carson introduced him, then nodded without speaking, and took the only open seat, right next to mine. I didn't pay him much attention that day, but I noticed, over the next week, he never spoke unless he had to. He always had this small, beat-up composition notebook with him. Not for class. It wasn't for notes. I saw him scribbling in it during lectures, during lunch, even once during a fire drill. Pages filled with tight, slanted writing, always in pencil. No one saw what he wrote, but he always wrote. The first time we spoke was about a quiz we both failed. I made a joke about how Mr. Carson graded like we were in law school. Rowan didn't laugh, but he said, "He grades like he wants to punish people for missing details." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. He added, "You don't miss much, do you?" I didn't think much of it at the time. A few days later, I found something strange in my locker. Tucked between my notebooks was a page torn from a composition book. No name, just a piece of writing. A story fragment about someone watching a classroom from the hallway, describing in vivid detail the sounds, smells, and individual mannerisms of the students inside, especially one girl. The description matched our class. It matched me. I looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and say it was a prank. But there was nothing. Just Rowan, sitting across the hall alone, pretending to read. I didn't confront him. I didn't want to start something if I wasn't sure, so I tucked the page into my folder and said nothing. That week, more pages appeared, always slipped into my locker, sometimes inside my textbook, once taped to the underside of my desk, each one more personal than the last. They were written like journal entries, but from a fictionalized perspective, someone watching, someone listening, someone waiting to be noticed. One entry described the exact outfit I'd worn the day before. Another mentioned how I chew my pen when I'm nervous, something I didn't even realize I did. I thought about showing a teacher, but what would I even say? The pages weren't threatening. They weren't violent, just intrusive and specific. A little too specific. Then, on Friday, he finally spoke to me again. "I liked the way you reacted to the ending," he said as we left class. "To what?" "The story. The one you read." He paused, and there was a flicker of something just under his voice. "Not everyone understands being watched, but you do." That night, I went home and tore apart every notebook I owned. I searched my bag, my pockets, even my bedroom drawers. I kept thinking, how did he know I'd read it? How did he know my reaction? Unless he'd seen me, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Like how Rowan never brought a backpack, just that same notebook, always held tight against his side. Or how he never used a phone, not even during lunch. No earbuds, no distractions. He just watched people. Not in an obvious way, but in the way someone might look at paintings in a museum. Slowly, deliberately, studying the cracks beneath the surface. I tried to ignore him. I told myself I was imagining it. But then he stopped slipping pages into my locker. They started appearing at home. The first one was inside my copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, which I kept in my bedroom bookshelf. A fresh, folded page tucked between chapters. I hadn't touched that book since freshman year. The writing was still in pencil, still in that strange, slanted style. This one was shorter, just a single paragraph. She reads like she's looking for a way out of the world, but the world never lets her leave. I froze. My parents were downstairs. My brother was at soccer practice. I hadn't told anyone about the pages, and my room was always locked when I wasn't home. I checked the windows. They were shut. No signs of forced entry. I told myself, maybe I brought the page home without realizing. Maybe I dropped it in my bag, and it slipped into the book. But deep down, I didn't believe that. A few days later, I stayed late at school to finish a project in the library. It was almost dark when I left. The hallways were mostly empty, just that weird hum from the old fluorescents. I turned a corner and there he was, Rowan, standing at the end of the hallway. Not moving, just standing still, hands in his pockets, staring straight at me. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. I walked past him as calmly as I could, but I could feel his eyes following me, like they were pulling threads from the back of my jacket. That night, I got the worst page yet. It was taped to my mirror. I hadn't even noticed it until I went to brush my teeth. There it was, dead center, plain white paper, held up with 2 strips of masking tape. I stared at it for a long time before pulling it off. I was afraid to read it, but of course I did. I know where your thoughts go when you think no one's watching. I know the version of you that you don't let anyone see. The one you leave behind in reflections. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told the school counselor everything. About the pages, the watching, the feeling of being recorded. She nodded, took notes, said she would follow up discreetly. That afternoon, Rowan wasn't in class, or the next day, or the day after that. When I asked about him, no one seemed to know anything. Not the teachers, not the office, not even the counselor, who just said, "There's no student by that name on our current roster." I went back to the spot in the hallway where I'd last seen him. Nothing. No trace. Like he'd been erased. I thought that would be the end of it. And for a while, it was. I started sleeping again. I even threw out the pages, or tried to. I burned them in the sink one by one. But here's the thing. I keep finding new ones, folded into my coat pockets, hidden in the margins of borrowed books, tucked inside cereal boxes. They're always short, always in pencil, always about me. And none of them are in my handwriting.
If these stories sent a chill down your spine, go ahead and tap that like button and subscribe for more eerie tales. What would you do if you were caught in one of these unsettling situations? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd really love to hear what's on your mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.